I stood at the panoramic window of my office on the 18th floor of the office building and looked out at the factory below. The evening sun painted the metal structures a golden color, turning the industrial landscape into something almost majestic. Every time I looked at this view, I felt a sense of pride. 20 years ago, there were only abandoned workshops and rusting equipment. Now it was a state-of-the-art facility, 3,000 jobs, cutting-edge technology. Mr. Thornton, the voice of Olivia Redfield, my secretary, interrupted my musings. You have a meeting in 5 minutes. Everyone's already gathered in the conference room. I turned around. Olivia, impeccable as always in her strict navy blue suit, was holding a clipboard. In her 3 years on the job, she'd become an indispensable part of the team's smart, attentive to detail. She had a knack for anticipating problems before they occurred. Thank you, Olivia. Are the paperwork for the deal with the Europeans ready? Yes, Mr. Thornton. Mr. Graves has made all the necessary edits to the contract. I've laid out copies on the table in the meeting room. I nodded and headed for the conference room. Along the corridor were photographs of the plant in various periods, from black and white photos from the 50s to modern aerial photographs of the entire complex. I had specially ordered to hang them here, to remember the history and never forget how much labor was put into this place. Key staff had already gathered in the conference room. Ashton Graves, our general counsel, was looking over some papers, frowning his bushy eyebrows. In the 20 years we'd worked together, I'd grown accustomed to his pedantry. It had saved the company from trouble more than once. Miles Ramirez, the head of security, stood at the window with his arms crossed over his chest. His military demeanor was still there even after 10 years of civilian life. Good evening, gentlemen. I took my place at the head of the table. Let's start with the security report. Miles stepped forward, his movements crisp and confident. No major incidents in the last month. Reinforced the perimeter security on Shop 3 as you requested. Installed additional cameras in the finished goods warehouse. Conducted an unscheduled fire safety inspection. Everything is normal. I listened to his report while reviewing the paperwork. The figures were good, production was growing, orders were coming in regularly. But something was bothering me lately, some vague premonition. Ashton, what about the contract with the Germans? Graves adjusted his glasses. Their lawyers have agreed to most of our terms. The technical details on delivery dates remain. I think we should be able to sign by the end of the week. Great. Olivia, schedule a video conference with Berlin for Friday, and prepare a report on... The phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from Ethel. Don't forget the restaurant. I made reservations for 7. Damn. I'd really almost forgotten about our weekly dinner. It had become a tradition. Every Wednesday we had dinner at Canlis, one of Seattle's finest restaurants. That's it for today. I closed the file folder. Olivia, reschedule the remaining meetings for tomorrow. Ashton, email me the final version of the contract. I'll review it tonight. As I left the building, I lingered at the gatehouse. The day shift was winding down and the evening shift was coming in. Workers greeted me. Someone stopped to have a word with me. I knew many of them by name. I thought it was important. Each of them contributed to the common cause. My Mercedes was waiting in the parking lot. As I sat behind the wheel, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My suit was a little wrinkled from the day, and there were wrinkles in the corners of my eyes. 40 years wasn't much, but every year left its mark. The drive to the restaurant took longer than usual. The traffic in the city center was a punishment. I turned on the news on the radio, but hardly listened. My thoughts went back to the factory, to new projects, to plans for expanding production. Ethel was already waiting for me at our usual table by the window. She was gorgeous in a dark green dress that emphasized the color of her eyes. We had met 4 years ago at a charity event. She was working at a large law firm at the time. We got married a year later. Sorry I'm late. I kissed her cheek. Traffic. That's okay, she smiled. I ordered wine, the Cabernet you like. The waiter brought the menu, but we didn't even open it. Our preferences had been well studied here in 3 years. Ethel always ordered lobster. I ordered steak. How was your day? She asked when the wine arrived. Productive. We're about to sign a contract with a German company. It will open up the European market to us. You talked about this contract a month ago. Deals like this don't happen quickly. You have to consider every detail, check every point. She nodded, but I noticed her attention was scattered. The phone on the edge of the desk vibrated quietly. A message had come in. Ethel cast a quick glance at the screen and tensed slightly. Something important? No, just a commercial. She tucked the phone away in her purse. Dinner continued as usual. We discussed the news, weekend plans, mutual acquaintances, but something subtly changed. Maybe it was the way she held her glass, a little tighter than usual, or in the way she avoided a direct look when talking about her work. Are you doing okay? I asked when dessert arrived. Sure. She smiled that same weird smile. Just tired, tough case at work. I didn't question further. In 3 years of marriage, I'd learned to respect her personal space. Ethel had always been independent. That was one of the qualities that attracted me to her. As I drove back home, I thought about how my life had changed in recent years. A successful business, a beautiful wife, respect in business circles, everything a man could dream of. Then why was there a vague uneasiness growing inside? Why was it that every time I looked at Ethel, I caught myself thinking that something was eluding my grasp? The phone rang as we pulled up to the house. Olivia. Mr. Thornton. Sorry for the late call. The paperwork from the IRS came in. There are discrepancies that Mr. Graves finds suspicious. He's asked to meet early tomorrow. Okay, I'll be there by 8. Ethel threw me a questioning look. Work? I explained. Nothing serious. She nodded and turned away to the window. In the light of the street lamps, her profile seemed cut out of dark paper, clear and a little alien. The morning started earlier than usual. I woke at 5 when the sky outside the window was just beginning to gray. Ethel was asleep, curled up on her side of the bed. We'd been waking up in each other's arms less and less often lately. I got up quietly, trying not to wake her, and went down to the home office. The tax documents Olivia had mentioned were already waiting in the mail. Looking through the numbers, I reached for the bottom drawer of my desk. There, behind the old papers, was a bottle of 18-year-old Macallan. I never drank in the morning, but sometimes I'd reach for the bottle just to hold it in my hands. It reminded me of the days when Lorenz Callahan and I were just starting the business. Whiskey was his passion. Every successful deal deserves a good sip, he used to say. We were young, ambitious, and believed we could build an empire together. How things have changed over the years. Are you awake yet? Ethel's voice caught me off guard. She was standing in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe. Yes, I have some paperwork to take care of. Sorry if I woke you up. That's okay. I didn't sleep well anyway. She came over, putting her hands on my shoulders. She smelled like lavender, the same French cream I'd brought her from my last business trip to Paris. Maybe you should work less. You spend so much time at the factory. The factory is my life. You know that. I know. She pulled her hands away and stepped back to the window. Sometimes I think it means more to you than anything else. There was a strange note in her voice, not resentment, something else. I wanted to respond, but the phone rang. Miles. Boss, we've got a problem at Plant 2. The night shift found a security malfunction. Looks like an attempted break-in. On my way. Ethel didn't even turn around as I left. Just jerked her shoulder as if dropping something invisible. The drive to the factory usually took 40 minutes, but at this early hour, the streets were empty. I drove, breaking the speed limit, and thought about what had happened 15 years ago. About the betrayal that had taught me not to trust anyone completely. Lorenz had started with the security systems back then, too. Small glitches, minor errors in protocols, nothing serious at first glance. And then it turned out he was plotting a raid. He wanted to buy my share for nothing, using false documents and blackmail. Miles was waiting at the gate of the second plant. His normally unflappable face was tense. Someone tried to access the servers. He held out a data tablet to me. A professional job. If it weren't for the new security system, we wouldn't have even noticed. I looked through the logs, feeling the anxiety growing inside. The handwriting was familiar, the same techniques Lorenz had used years ago. Is Olivia in the office yet? Yes. I've called in the entire team. Good. Gather data on all systems for the last month, every login, every request, and contact IT security. Have them check all the backups. The office was already bustling with work. Olivia was dispensing instructions over the phone. Ashton had some documents spread out on the conference table. His assistants were scurrying between offices with folders and laptops. Mr. Thornton, Olivia handed me a glass of coffee. The IRS sent a clarification on yesterday's paperwork. Mr. Graves thinks it's not a coincidence. Ashton looked up from the papers. Someone is trying to access financial information through the IRS, making formal requests on behalf of minority shareholders. So far, it's all legal, but the handwriting is familiar, I finished for him. He nodded. Very similar to Callahan's methods, only more sophisticated. I went to the window. Downstairs, workers were preparing the shop for the start of the morning shift. The movements had been honed over the years. Everyone knew his place, his task. I'd built it all from the ruins, picked the people, built the team, and now someone's trying to tear it down again. What about the stock? I asked without turning around. Stable so far, Olivia replied. But there's some strange activity from a few small investment companies. They're buying up small blocks through different brokers. Check those companies, all the connections, all the history, and get an update on Lawrence, where he is now, what he's doing. Already working on it. She made a note in her clipboard. Also, Mrs. Thornton called, asked if you'd be home for dinner. Something in her tone made me turn around. Olivia was studiously avoiding my gaze, like she knew something she didn't want to talk about. Anything else? She paused. It probably doesn't mean anything. It's just that I've noticed that Mrs. Thornton has been calling the office a lot lately when you're not there. Asking about your schedule, about appointments. She's my wife. That's normal. Of course it is. Olivia nodded, but I could see she wasn't convinced. It's just never happened before. I turned back to the paperwork, but my thoughts were jumbled. I remembered last night's dinner, the strange message on Ethel's phone, her tense posture. Little things that individually meant nothing, but added up to a disturbing picture. The day dragged on endlessly. We checked systems, analyzed data, searched for connections. Miles organized extra security at all the sites. Ashton prepared legal defenses against possible attacks. Toward evening, Ethel called. Are you coming tonight? I'll try to. Lots of work to do. Sure, came a sarcastic note in her voice. Work always comes first. Ethel. Don't bother. I've got stuff to do too. I'll see you at home. She disconnected without waiting for a reply. I stared at the dark screen of the phone, feeling something akin to fear growing inside. Not for the business, for us. For something that seemed so solid, but had suddenly started to crumble like a house of cards. Mr. Thornton, Olivia's voice snapped me out of my reverie. Found something interesting. One of the investment companies buying up stock is registered at the address Callahan used to use. Show me. The paperwork was impeccable, too flawless, like everything Lorenz did. He always knew how to cover his tracks, create the perfect cover. That's why 15 years ago I had to be proactive, not waiting for him to strike. Gather all the information on this company, every transaction, every contact, and step up surveillance for any unusual activity. The house was dark and quiet. A note on the kitchen table announced that Ethel had gone to a friend's house and would be back late. I poured myself a whiskey, the same Macallan, and went out on the terrace. The city below was twinkling with lights, as restless as my thoughts. My phone vibrated a message from Olivia. Found something else. It's important. Talk to you in the morning? Yeah, I'll be there at 7. I finished my whiskey, feeling the chill inside. 15 years ago, I'd thought it was over. That Lorenz Callahan was out of my life forever. Now I realized it was only the beginning. Olivia was waiting for me at the office entrance at 7 in the morning sharp. In her hands, 2 cups of coffee from that little coffee shop around the corner that made the best Americano in town. She remembered details like that. Part of what made her indispensable. Good morning, Mr. Thornton. She handed me one of the cups. The information I found yesterday, I think you'd better see it in the office. The printer was already humming habitually in the reception area, smelling of fresh pastries. Olivia always ordered croissants for the morning meetings. These little things gave the illusion of normalcy, but something in her gaze told her the quiet morning would end quickly. Some more reports came in overnight. She pulled out a folder as soon as we entered the office. I checked all the connections of that investment company. Take a look at the dates of incorporation. I looked through the documents. The company had been incorporated 4 years ago, almost to the day with my introduction to Ethel. It could be a coincidence, I said, but my voice treacherously shook. There's something else, Olivia hesitated. I found some old photos in the business press archives, an article from 15 years ago about your conflict with Mr. Callahan. She opened a snapshot on her tablet, a group photo from some charity party Lorenz surrounded by guests. And next to him, a young Ethel. Different hair, different makeup, but it was definitely her. When was this photo taken? 2 months before your breakup with Callahan. There was a knock on the door. Miles never entered without knocking, even in the most urgent cases. Sorry for the early intrusion, boss. The night shift picked up strange activity on Plant 3's surveillance system. Someone was trying to access the archives. I set the clipboard aside. Successful? No, but, he faltered. The attempt was made from a corporate IP address. One of ours. Find out who. Olivia quietly walked out. She always had a sense of when to leave me alone. I walked over to the window. Downstairs, workers were getting ready to start the morning shift. Alexander from the second crew was checking the fasteners. Victor was setting up the equipment. The men I'd trusted with my job. Now I had to doubt everything and everyone. The phone vibrated. A message from Ethel. I'll be late at work today. Important business. Don't expect me for dinner. Such messages had never been questioned before. Now every word seemed part of some big lie. The day stretched on slowly. Ashton brought the results of the tax records audit. Nothing illegal, but all lined up to make the company's job as difficult as possible. Classic Lorenz M.O. He always preferred to operate on the edge of the law. Mr. Thornton. Olivia peeked into the office toward evening. The bank called. Someone was requesting information about the company's major transactions over the last year. An official request? Yes, it's all legal. Through a law firm called Brighton and Associates. I froze. Brighton was Ethel's maiden name. Coincidence? How many more coincidences like that would have to happen? Check out that firm, all the connections, all the partners, and get me a full dossier on Ethel. Where she worked before we met, who she socialized with. Already working on it. She paused. There's one more thing. Mrs. Thornton called 3 times while you were away. Asked about a meeting with the German partners. About the details of the contract. I felt my back grow cold. Ethel had never been interested in details of deals before. What did you tell her? Just general information. That the meeting is on Friday. Good. If she calls again, write down any questions. I didn't go home that evening. I sat in my office looking through old photos, documents, letters, looking for signs I should have seen before. Here's a photo from the fundraiser where I met Ethel. Was it a chance meeting? Here are the first events we did together. She was always there for me when it came to business. Always showed an interest in my work. Miles sent the report around 10. The attempt to access the cameras was made from a computer in the legal department. We haven't been able to determine exactly which one yet. I pulled out a bottle of Macallan. The whiskey burned my throat, bringing back memories. Lorenz liked to say, there are no friends in business, Forrest, only interests. I didn't believe him then. Now every word he said rang with bitter truth. The phone vibrated again, this time ringing. You're not coming home? Ethel's voice sounded concerned. Or was it a game? There's a lot of work to do. Negotiating with the Germans. You've been working too much lately. A strange note came into her voice. Maybe you should take a vacation. We could go somewhere. Just you and me. Maybe. I took a sip of whiskey. How was your day? The usual. Complicated case, lots of paperwork. What kind of case? A second pause. Almost imperceptible. But I'd already learned to pick up on them. Corporate dispute. Nothing interesting. I see. Okay, I've got to get back to work. Forrest. She was quiet for a moment. I love you. Before, those words had warmed her heart. Now they sounded like part of some complicated plan. And you. The night outside the window was thickening. Somewhere in the factory, machines hummed. The night shift was in full force. I looked out at the lights of the city and thought about how easy it is to lose everything you believe in. How easy it is to destroy what you've spent years building. Olivia texted at midnight. Found some interesting information about Mrs. Thornton's past. Can we discuss it in the morning? 7 in the study. I poured another whiskey. On the table was our wedding picture. Ethel in a white dress smiling for the camera. Was that smile sincere? Or was it all part of the plan even then? Miles showed up around 1 o'clock in the morning. He often stayed late, too. Boss, you'd better go home. There's an important meeting in the morning. I know, I pointed to the bottle. Want some company? He shook his head. Not this time, but I'll stay until you leave. Such a job. Loyalty. That's what Lorenz had never understood. He only believed in money and power. I built a team of people who were willing to go through any hardship with me. At 2 in the morning, I drove home. Ethel was already asleep, or pretending to be asleep. I stared at her silhouette in the dark and thought about how many questions would come up tomorrow, and whether I was ready to hear the answers to them. I arrived at the office earlier than usual. At 6 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned all night, listening to Ethel's breathing, trying to catch whether she was pretending or really asleep. Once her presence had been soothing. Now every breath seemed part of some elaborate game. Olivia showed up at 7 sharp, as agreed. In her hands were the usual cups of coffee and a folder of papers. Her eyes were restless. She hadn't gotten much sleep, the dark circles under her eyes giving away the sleepless night. Good morning, Mr. Thornton. She placed the folder on the desk. I've been doing a little investigating. What I found, you need to see this. Inside were old newspaper clippings, printouts of articles, photographs. One of them showed Ethel, only younger, in her senior year of law school. Next to her is a young Lorenz Callahan, presenting some kind of award. It's from the student awards ceremony, Olivia explained. Mr. Callahan was one of the sponsors of the program. Judging by the dates, he personally supervised your wife's education. I felt my throat go dry. When was that? 2 years before your conflict with him. There are more photos from various events from that period. They often appeared together. The next picture showed them at some kind of reception. Lorenz saying something in Ethel's ear. She laughing. They looked close. Is there something else? Yes. Olivia pulled out another document. After graduation, Mrs. Thornton worked at the law firm that handled Mr. Callahan's affairs. It was during the period when he was preparing an attempt to take over my business. I finished for her. There was a knock on the door. Miles never changed his habits. Boss, we have a problem with our suppliers. 3 major companies have announced contract renegotiations at the same time, demanding new terms. I rubbed my temples. Coincidence? Hardly. All 3 companies recently changed legal support. Guess which firm? Brighton and Associates? He nodded. I looked out the window. The workers were unloading another shipment of raw materials. These people depended on me, on the stable operation of the plant. And now someone was methodically trying to destroy that stability. Get the whole team together in an hour. We need to develop a plan of action. When they left, I pulled out my cell phone. 3 missed calls from Ethel. The message, "Honey, why don't we have dinner together? I miss you." These messages used to bring a warm smile to my face. Now every word seemed fake, every phrase part of some plan. The conference room was packed with all the key personnel. Ashton had a stack of documents spread out in front of him. His assistants were quickly typing something on their laptops. Miles stood at the window with his arms crossed over his chest. Olivia took her seat next to me, ready to write down every decision. So what do we have? I looked around at the people present. Attempts to hack into our systems have increased over the past month. Suppliers have suddenly decided to renegotiate contracts. The IRS is taking a keen interest in our affairs. Someone is methodically trying to undermine the situation. There's something else. Ashton adjusted his glasses. I checked the recent real estate transactions. 3 buildings owned by the company have been mortgaged for loans. The documents were signed 2 months ago. Signed by whom? By you, sir. It's a forgery. I didn't sign anything. The signatures are real. I checked it twice. How is that possible? Olivia coughed quietly. Mr. Thornton, 2 months ago you signed a large packet of documents before a business trip to Europe. Mrs. Thornton brought them herself and said it was urgent. I remembered that evening. Ethel in her house robe, with a cup of tea, hurrying me through the signatures. Honey, these are standard documents. I've checked everything, don't worry. Check where the money from these loans went. My voice sounded muffled. Already checked. Ashton pulled out another folder. They went through 5 different companies and ended up in the accounts of an investment fund, the same one registered at Callahan's old address. A heavy silence hung in the room. Everyone understood what it meant. Mr. Thornton? Olivia placed another document in front of me. There's one more thing. I checked Mrs. Thornton's phone records for the last year. One number is repeated particularly often. The calls are usually late at night or early in the morning. Whose number? Registered to a shell company. But the geolocation? All calls are from the grounds of Lorenz Callahan's country home. I got up and went to the window. Downstairs, work was boiling. The huge machine I'd spent years building was still in operation. People were hurrying about their business. Cars were delivering products. Chimneys were smoking. My world that someone was methodically trying to destroy. What do we do, boss? Miles's voice brought me out of my daze. What we've always done. Protect what's ours. I turned to the team. Ashton, prepare legal defenses on all fronts. Miles, beef up security at all sites. Olivia. Yes, Mr. Thornton. Keep digging. I need to know everything. Every move, every contact, every meeting. The phone vibrated again. Another message from Ethel. I made reservations at our favorite restaurant. You need to take your mind off work. I stared at the screen and thought about how many lies lurked behind those simple words. How much betrayal behind every show of concern. Answer her, Olivia said suddenly. Tell her you're coming. Let her think we don't know anything. I nodded and wrote a short, I'll be there at 7. The day dragged on endlessly. We checked documents, analyzed financial flows, searched for connections. Each new finding confirmed a terrible hunch. All these years I had an enemy by my side, a man methodically preparing my downfall. Before leaving for the restaurant, I lingered at my table. I took our wedding picture out of the drawer. Ethel in her white dress smiling so sincerely, so brightly. Was it really a mask even then? Was every moment of our happiness just a role well played? Mr. Thornton! Olivia stood in the doorway. The car is ready. Be careful. I nodded, stashing the picture back in the drawer. Ahead of me was dinner with the woman I loved, with the woman who betrayed me before I even knew her real face. Canlis Restaurant greeted me with the usual atmosphere of luxury and comfort. The hostess, recognizing me, escorted me to our table, the same table where Ethel and I had sat every Wednesday for the past 3 years. She was already waiting, wearing the dark blue dress I'd given her last Christmas. Her hair was gathered, and around her neck was a pearl necklace, my first wedding anniversary present. Honey, she smiled and reached up to kiss my cheek. She smelled like her favorite perfume, Chanel No. 5. The smell that used to be associated with home and happiness was now a deafening irritation. I already ordered wine. I sat down across from him, trying to keep a casual demeanor. The waiter poured the wine into glasses, the same Cabernet we'd drunk on the day of our engagement. Every detail, every gesture now seemed part of an elaborate performance. How was your day? She asked, raising her glass. Productive. I forced myself to smile. Problems with the vendors. Oh, really? Something resembling interest sounded in her voice. Nothing serious, I hope? I watched her carefully, trying to catch even a shadow of guilt or worry. But her face remained serene. Years of practicing law had taught her to control every expression. 3 companies simultaneously decided to renegotiate contracts. Strange coincidence, don't you think? For a split second, just a moment, her fingers gripped the stem of the glass a little tighter. But her voice remained steady. These things happen in business. I'm sure Ashton will sort it out. Yes, of course. By the way, they've changed law firms. Brighton and Associates represents them now. Now she didn't even flinch, just smiled a little wider. Really? I haven't heard of that one. A lie, another lie in an endless chain of deception. I took a sip of wine to hide the bitterness in my mouth. The phone in my pocket vibrated a message from Olivia. Urgent. Attempted hack into the main server. Miles is requesting emergency authorization. Something important? Ethel tilted her head to the side, studying my face. Work matters. I quickly typed a reply. Proceed. Immediately a second message. Check where the attack is coming from. You're working too hard. Ethel covered my hand with hers. Her fingers were cool, as always. How many times had I kissed those hands? How many times had they hugged me in the morning? Maybe we should take a vacation. Go somewhere just the two of us? Where do you want to go? Remember that little hotel on Lake Como, where we were on our honeymoon? I remembered. I remembered her standing on the balcony looking out at the sunset and saying she'd never been happier. Now I wondered if even a minute of that trip had been real. New message from Olivia. Attack repelled. The source is an office building downtown. Address matches the Brighton and Associates branch. Forrest? Ethel squeezed my hand lightly. You seem tense. Is something wrong? Just tired, I tried to smile. You're right. Maybe we really should rest. She brightened. Really? I can do the organizing. I know a great travel agent. Sure. I picked up the phone again. Check all outgoing calls and data transfers from the office, especially from the legal department. The waiter brought our usual entrees. Lobster for her, steak for me. We talked about nothing. A new play at the theater, an upcoming fundraiser, plans for the weekend. From the outside, we probably looked like a normal married couple enjoying dinner together. Honey, she blotted her lips with a napkin. I've been thinking, maybe you should get someone to help you run the company. You're taking on too much. I froze. This was it. The first tentative step. I have a great team. Yeah, sure, but I have someone at the partner level in mind. Someone with experience running a large business. I looked at her and saw how perfectly she played her role. A caring wife, thinking of the good of her husband. Every gesture, every intonation calibrated to the last detail. The phone vibrated again, this time Miles. Boss, we've detected strange activity in the document management system. Someone's been copying the financial reports for the last 5 years. Sorry. I got up from the desk. I need to take this call. The restroom was empty. I turned on the water to muffle my voice. Can you trace who? The login is under your wife's username. Of course. I gave her access to all the systems myself 2 years ago. She's my chief counselor, I'd told Ashton when he'd raised doubts. Returning to the table, I caught Ethel on the phone. She finished quickly when she saw me. Sorry, work, she smiled guiltily. Complicated case. Yeah, everyone's got a complicated case right now. She looked at me carefully. You're kind of weird today. Is something wrong? No, nothing's wrong. Really? You know you can always talk to me. I'm your wife. Wife. What a simple word. And what a scary word when you realize there's a lie behind it. The rest of dinner was a blur. We talked about things, smiled, played the usual roles. But inside me, everything was squeezing from her every touch, from every look. When we left the restaurant, she pressed against me like she had done hundreds of times before. Shall we go home? Sorry, I have to stop by the office. Urgent business. Work again, she sighed. Okay, I'll see you at home then. I watched her get into the cab and thought about where she was really going. To whose house? Whose house? At the office, the whole team was waiting for me. Olivia, Miles, Ashton. No one had gone home despite the late hour. We've compiled all the data. Olivia handed me a folder. This has been going on for a long time. Methodical, systematic. They've been preparing for at least a year. They? Mrs. Thornton and Mr. Callahan. We have evidence of their meetings, their correspondence, their joint actions. I sat back in my chair, feeling the fatigue rolling in. Show me everything. All night we pored over documents, analyzing data, building chains of events. The story of betrayal was unfolding before us in all its glory, a perfectly planned operation to destroy everything I'd created. I didn't go home, couldn't see her, couldn't play these games. I stayed in the office looking out at the city at night and thinking about how I blindly believed in a love that never existed. I spent the night in the office, falling asleep intermittently in my chair to the hum of the air conditioner. Empty coffee cups piled up on the desk, Olivia bringing it every hour until I sent her home around 3 in the morning. Dawn caught me at the window. I watched the city slowly wake up, the windows in the houses lighting up, the first workers rushing to their morning shift. My phone was bursting with messages and missed calls from Ethel. "Honey, where are you? Why haven't you come home? I'm worried. Call me when you see the messages." Every word now seemed fake, every phrase part of an elaborate plan. I looked at the screen and saw not the concern of a loving wife, but the cold calculation of an enemy. There was a quiet knock at the door. Miles. He was the only one who came this early. "Good morning, boss." He set a fresh pot of coffee on the table. "Sorry for the early visit, but we've got a problem. Big ones." "What's wrong?" "Remember that loan you took out on the foreclosed buildings? The bank is demanding early repayment. They say they found some irregularities in the documentation." I grinned bitterly. "Let me guess. Their legal advisor was Brighton and Partners?" "Bingo." I walked over to the window. Downstairs, workers were preparing the shop for startup. People who had entrusted me with their fortunes, their futures. How many families depended on the stable operation of the plant? 2,000? 3? And now it could all come crashing down because of the betrayal of the man closest to them. "Mr. Thornton." Olivia appeared in the doorway with a clipboard in hand. "We have something else. A notice came in overnight from our biggest clients. They want to renegotiate their contracts, all at the same time." "A coordinated attack," Miles shook his head. "They're hitting on all fronts." I sat back in my chair, feeling my fingers go numb. Ethel's face flashed before my eyes, as I'd seen her yesterday at the restaurant. Calm, smiling, offering to take a vacation. All this time she'd been preparing to strike, and I just didn't want to see the obvious. "Where's Ashton?" "On his way." Olivia was quickly typing something into a clipboard. "He spent the night consulting with lawyers. Says we have a chance of challenging the bank's claims, but we need to act fast." The phone vibrated again. Another call from Ethel. I dropped it. "Boss." Miles stepped closer. "There's something else. My men followed your wife after the restaurant." I looked up. "And?" "She didn't go home. She went out of town. To Callahan's house." Something shivered inside. It was one thing to suspect, quite another to get confirmation. "Do you have pictures?" He silently held out an envelope. The pictures showed Ethel entering the gates of a lavish mansion. The next shot showed Lorenz greeting her at the door. The last one showed them embracing in the light of the street lamps. "How long was she there?" "All night. Left around 6 in the morning." I stared at the pictures, and each one hit like a slap in the face. 3 years of marriage, thousands of meals together, hundreds of plans for the future, all were lies. "Mr. Thornton," Olivia's voice was soft. "The front desk called. Mrs. Thornton is here. She wants to see you." I gripped the armrests of my chair. "Send her in." Miles and Olivia glanced over. "Are you sure, boss?" "Yes, it's time to end this play." She walked in, impeccably dressed as always. Light gray suit, pearl earrings, light makeup. Only there was anxiety in her eyes. "Forrest, honey, why didn't you answer the phone? I've been so worried." I silently put the pictures on the table. She came closer, took one look, and froze. A second, 2, 3. I watched the expression on her face change. "It's not what you think." "What am I supposed to think, Ethel? That my wife is spending her nights in the house of a man who is trying to destroy my business? That all our years together were part of a revenge plan?" She straightened, and the mask of the caring wife finally fell away. "It's your own fault, Forrest. You ruined his life, took away everything he had." "He tried to steal my company. He built it with you, and you threw it away like a piece of junk." I stood up, feeling my legs shake. "How many years, Ethel?" How many years have you been planning this? Since the beginning. She smiled, but there was nothing of the woman I knew in that smile. You know, it's even been fun watching you fall in love, such a smart businessman, and so blind in your personal life. Each word hit, more painful than the last. I looked at her and didn't recognize her. Where had my gentle, caring Ethel gone? Or had she never existed? And now what? Do you think you'll succeed in taking my company away from me? Oh, honey, she shook her head. We already did. Check your mail. An hour ago, the board received documents proving your manipulation of company assets. Very convincing documents. A commission from the IRS and the prosecutor's office will be here by tonight. It's a forgery. Of course it is. But it will take you a long time to prove it. In the meantime, how many customers do you think will stay with a company suspected of financial fraud? How many banks will continue lending? There was a knock at the door. Ashton came in, out of breath, carrying a folder of documents. Mr. Thornton, we need— Oh, Mrs. Thornton, good morning. Good, Mr. Graves, she smiled. I won't bother you. You must have a lot of work to do. She headed for the exit, but stopped at the door. You know, Forrest, what's your biggest mistake? You were so proud of your empire that you forgot. Everything in life comes with a price. Lorenz has waited 15 years for this moment, and I've waited with him. When the door closed behind her, I sank into the chair. It was empty inside. No anger, no pain, just a deafening weariness. Boss, Miles stepped forward. What do we do? I looked out the window. The sun was rising over the city, illuminating the metal structures of the factory. My life's work. The same thing we've always done. I turned to the team. Let's fight. Ashton, round up all the lawyers. Miles, beef up security at all facilities. Olivia, yes, Mr. Thornton. Contact our partners, all of them. I need to know who's with us and who's against us. They went off to run errands, and I was left alone in the office. There were pictures on the desk, evidence of the betrayal that had ruined my life. But I couldn't afford to give up. Too many people depended on me. Too much was at stake. The day passed like a blur. After Ethel left, we worked feverishly to try to avert disaster. Ashton and his team were preparing documents to refute the allegations. Miles was coordinating security. Olivia was calling the partners, trying to keep the situation under control. By late afternoon, I was feeling drained. I stood at the window, looking out at the setting sun, coloring the metal structures of the plant blood red. 20 years of life had been invested in these walls. Every shop, every machine, every production line, all built from the ground up. All part of my dream. Mr. Thornton, Olivia's voice brought me out of my daze. You need to see this. She placed an old folder of yellowed photographs on the table. The first one showed a young Ethel with a law school diploma. Next to her is Lorenz, smiling, in an expensive suit. His arm around her waist, a gesture that speaks of intimacy. This is just the beginning. Olivia turned the page. See the dates. The pictures told a story I didn't want to see. Ethel and Lorenz at fundraisers, on vacation, at business meetings, year after year, long before we met. They were together. My voice sounded muffled. All this time? Yes. And there's something else. She pulled out a document. This is a statement from Mr. Callahan's old account. Look at the transactions from 15 years ago. I ran my eyes over the lines and froze. Large transfers to the account of the law firm where Ethel worked then, exactly in the days when Lorenz was preparing an attempted takeover of my business. She was helping him, from the beginning. Not only that, Olivia put down another document. Remember that charity event where you two met? It wasn't an accident. Ethel specifically organized it through her firm. Picked out the venue, the guest list, even the menu. I sank into the chair, feeling my head begin to spin. Every memory of our first meeting, every moment of budding love, it was all a lie. Carefully planned, perfectly played out. Miles knocked on the door. Boss, the IRS is here, with a warrant to check all the records. Let them check. I rubbed my forehead. We've got nothing to hide. It's not just that. They're demanding a shutdown of the main production facility, allegedly for a safety check. I stood up abruptly. Stopping production meant canceling all contracts, fines, loss of customers. That's exactly what they wanted. Ashton's already working on it, Miles added. Says there's a chance of challenging the decision through the courts. How long will that take? At least a week, maybe more. I went to the window. Downstairs, the workers were finishing their evening shift. People who trusted me, who had built this production with me. What would I tell them tomorrow? My phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. I opened it and felt my back grow cold. A picture. Lorenz and Ethel in his office leaning over some papers. Signed, "You didn't think I'd forget, did you, old friend?" "Mr. Thornton." Olivia touched my shoulder. "You need to eat. You haven't eaten anything since this morning." "Not now. Please. The company needs you strong." I looked at her. Young, beautiful, dedicated. That's how Ethel had been when I met her. Or was I just imagining it? "You know, Olivia, I loved her. Really loved her." She squeezed my hand in silence. What can I say? What words can comfort a man who's lost more than a wife, who's lost his faith in the lightest of feelings? By nightfall, I was exhausted and out of breath. Ashton left to prepare the court papers. Miles coordinated security just in case. It was just Olivia and I in the empty office, sorting through the papers. "Here." She handed me an old envelope. "Found it in the archives. This is a letter Lorenz wrote to you 15 years ago before you kicked him out." I unfolded the yellowed sheet. Lorenz's handwriting, sharp, angular. "You think you've won, Forrest. You think you've taken it all, but you've forgotten the most important thing. Time plays for the man who can wait. And I will wait, years if necessary. And when you least expect it, I'll take everything from you. Not just your business, your faith in people. You'll look at every man and wonder if he's a traitor. This is my revenge, old friend. And it will be sweet." He planned the whole thing. I crumpled the letter. Used my loneliness, my need for love. Used Ethel, Olivia added quietly. Or did she want it herself? Maybe their love is real and ours. Ours was just an act? It had long since gotten dark outside the window. The city twinkled with lights, indifferent to human dramas. Somewhere out there, in a luxurious country house, they were probably celebrating victory, making plans to take over my company, laughing at my blindness. I turned to Olivia. I looked through our photos, remembering every moment together, and I can't figure it out. What was true? When she smiled at me in the mornings, when she cared, when she told me she loved me. Was it all a lie? Or was there something real slipping through somewhere, even for a moment? Olivia was silent. What was there to say? How to console a man who had lost not just his beloved, but his faith in the very possibility of love? A new message from Ethel. "I'm sorry, but you had to know what it was like to lose everything you believed in." I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled our wedding picture out of my desk drawer. We were so happy then. Or was it just me? She was smiling so genuinely. Or was it just a great actress's performance? "Mr. Thornton," Olivia was gathering papers. "It's getting late. You need to get some rest. It's a busy day tomorrow." "Yeah, sure." I continued to stare at the picture. You know, it's funny. I've always prided myself on the fact that I built this business from the ground up, that I'd created something real, lasting. And in the end, it turned out that the most important things, love, family, were fake. "Not everything is fake." She put a hand on my shoulder. "You have company, people who believe in you, a team willing to fight to the end." I nodded, but there was only emptiness inside. The factory, the contracts, the business connections, all of it seemed so insignificant compared to losing faith in love, in the sincerity of human relationships. "Thank you, Olivia. Go home. We'll need all our strength tomorrow." She left, and I was left sitting in the dark, looking out at the nighttime city, and thinking about how easy it was to ruin a man's life, not by taking away anything tangible from him, just by stealing his faith in love and sincerity. The morning was overcast. Heavy clouds hung over the city, as if reflecting my condition. I spent the night in the office, falling into a short, restless sleep. Each time I awoke to nightmares in which Ethel laughed at my naivete. At 7 o'clock, Olivia showed up, tired but focused. Instead of the usual coffee, she brought a thermos of strong green tea. "You need something soothing," she explained, pouring the flavored beverage. "Coffee will only make you more anxious." I nodded gratefully. Small acts of caring were what helped keep me going, though now every kind gesture made me wary. Was there another motive behind it? "The tax commission will be here in an hour." Olivia spread out the paperwork on the table. "Ashton has prepared all the necessary paperwork. He wanted me to tell you that we need to be very transparent. Any attempt to hide anything will be used against us." I walked over to the window. Downstairs, the workers were gathering at the gatehouse. The morning shift was starting. Victor from the 2nd Brigade was explaining something to a young trainee, pointing at the production building. Alexander was checking the loading equipment. A typical morning at the plant, a place that was a second home to me. "Mr. Thornton," Miles entered the office. "I have some unpleasant news. Security has intercepted strange activity on the system. Someone is trying to access the contract archive." "Ethel?" "No, logging in from a different IP address, but the handwriting is similar." I clenched my fists. Surely they were acting in the open now. Why hide when the cards were revealed? My phone vibrated on the table, a message from an unknown number. A picture, Lorenz and Ethel having breakfast on the terrace of his house. She's laughing, throwing her head back, just as she'd laughed with me just a week ago at our kitchen table. "Boss." Miles steps closer. "Maybe we should change the number." "No, let them send it. Every message is more proof of their collusion." Ashton showed up at 9, laden with file folders. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled. Apparently he'd spent the night working too. "The commission's already here." He adjusted his glasses. "Started with the finance department, but that's not the worst of it. I've got information from a reliable source. They're preparing an involuntary bankruptcy suit." "On what grounds?" "Allegedly, the company has huge hidden debts. Forged documents, of course, but of very high quality. It will take time to prove the forgery." "How long?" "Months. Maybe a year." I sank into the chair. A year. They'd calculated it all. The company wouldn't survive that long of an audit. Customers would leave, banks would deny credit, production would grind to a halt. "Mr. Thornton," Olivia handed me a fresh printout. "There's a letter from the board of directors. They're demanding an extraordinary meeting, today at 4 o'clock. Of course. Next move in their game. Who initiated the meeting? A group of minority shareholders, the same investment firms that have been buying up shares for the past few months. I looked over the list of demands and chuckled bitterly. Temporary suspension of management during the audit period. Appointment of an external manager. A full audit of all operations. They want to seize control of the company legally. Ashton shook his head. Perfectly planned. Even if we prove our case, it will take so long that the company simply won't survive. There was a knock at the door. The secretary of the tax commission, a young woman with a folder of documents, entered. Mr. Thornton, the commission would like you to come down to the conference room. I'll be there in a minute. As she walked out, I turned to the team. Miles, check all commission members. Any ties to Callahan or his companies. Ashton, get the paperwork ready for the board meeting. Olivia, yes? Find me everything you can about Lorenz's financial situation. Where's the money for this whole operation coming from? They went off to run errands and I was left alone. On the table was a picture of Ethel and me from last year's corporate party. She was in a dark blue dress, clinging to me, smiling for the camera. Now I saw something in that smile that I hadn't noticed before. The cold calculation of a predator waiting for the moment to attack. The phone vibrated again, this time a call from Ethel. I didn't think you'd resist for so long. Her voice sounded almost affectionate. Always admired your stubbornness. What do you want? To talk, to meet for lunch. For old time's sake? What old times, Ethel? The ones when you pretended to love me? She was quiet for a moment. You know, sometimes I really thought I could love you. You were so real. Not like Lorenz and his eternal games. But you chose him. I chose him 15 years ago, Forrest. Everything else was just part of the plan. And our marriage? Especially him. A note of regret appeared in her voice. I'm sorry, but you must have felt what it's like when everything you believe in turns out to be a lie. I dropped the call. My hands were shaking, whether from anger or pain. There was another knock on the door. Olivia. I'm sorry, but the board is waiting. I heard the conversation. It's okay. No, it's not okay. She stepped closer. But we'll get through this. We have something they don't. A real team. People who believe in you. I looked at her, the way Ethel had once seemed. Thank you, Olivia. But you know, I'm not sure I can trust anyone anymore. Then believe in the business you've created, in the people who were given the job, in the dream that was realized. She was right. No matter what happened to my personal life, the plant remained real. The machines, the shops, the workers, it was all real, tangible. As I walked down to the conference room, I thought about how strangely life works. You build a business, create something large scale, and in the end, the worst blow comes not from competitors or crisis, from the person you trusted with your heart. The commission was waiting. 10 people with stone faces and folders of documents. The most difficult battle of my life was beginning, and I had to stand my ground. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the conference room of the main office was filled to capacity. Board members, lawyers, shareholder representatives, all gathered to decide the fate of the company. I sat at the head of the table, looking at familiar and unfamiliar faces, trying to guess which of them had already been bought by Lorenz. Ashton was to my right, spreading out the papers in front of him. His assistants were talking quietly, checking some data. Olivia took her usual place next to my chair, notebook at the ready, eyes focused. Miles stood by the door, watching intently. Gentlemen, the chairman of the board, Gerald Hawkins, began. We are meeting today at the request of a group of shareholders who own 15% of the company. I looked out the window where I could see the hulks of the plant. 20 years ago, the place had been nothing but ruins and rusting equipment. I remembered my first day here. Young, ambitious, full of ideas. Back then, Lorenz and I had dreamed of building something great. Who would have thought it would end up like this? The first item on the agenda is to consider a request to suspend the current management due to suspicions of financial fraud. A whisper ran through the room. I noticed some of the board members studiously avoiding my gaze. How many of them already knew what was going to happen? How many were part of the plan? I have the documents. The minority representative, a young lawyer in an expensive suit, stood up. Evidence of systematic mismanagement of the company's assets. Ashton hummed quietly. Fake, high quality, but a forgery nonetheless. Can we prove it? I whispered to him. Yes, but it will take time. A lot of time. Time was exactly what we didn't have. I knew their plan. Drag out the proceedings, wear the company down with audits, scare away customers and partners. And then, when the stock was down to its lowest point, the conference room door opened. I felt my heart stop. Ethel stood on the threshold. In a strict black suit, impeccably combed, she looked like the epitome of business elegance. Behind her loomed the tall figure of Lorenz Callahan. Sorry I'm late, Ethel smiled at the assembled crowd. Traffic jams. She strode to a vacant seat, heels tapping measuredly on the parquet. Lorenz remained standing at the door, leaning against the jam with the same careless grace he had 15 years ago. Mrs. Thornton, the chairman nodded. We're just looking into the matter of financial irregularities. Yes, I'm aware of that. She pulled a folder from her briefcase. I have additional material on the matter. I looked at her and didn't recognize her. Where was the woman who woke me up in the morning with kisses? Who knew my favorite coffee by heart? Who shared dreams and plans with me? Before we go any further, I stood up, feeling the stares of everyone present. I'd like to show the board something. Olivia handed out folders of documents. The results of our investigation. Photographs, bank statements, phone records, the whole story of the betrayal, laid out minute by minute. This is evidence of a carefully planned operation to take over the company. My voice sounded calm, even though everything was boiling inside. An operation that began 15 years ago when Mr. Callahan first tried to take the business away from me. A surprised whisper ran through the hall. Ethel didn't even flinch, only gripped the handle of her briefcase a little tighter. 3 years ago, phase 2 of the plan began. Using personal relationships, certain individuals gained access to internal company information. I placed our wedding photo on the table. It was part of the plan. Everything from the first meeting to the last breakfast was carefully orchestrated. Lorenz had stopped smiling now, too. He straightened up, looking at me with the same cold calculation he had 15 years ago. "Do you have proof of these allegations?" the chairman asked. "I do." I nodded to Olivia, and she turned on the projector. Surveillance footage appeared on the screen. Ethel entering Lorenz's house, their meetings in restaurants, the handing over of documents. Dates, times, places, all recorded. "This is illegal surveillance." Lorenz raised his voice for the first time. "No, Mr. Callahan. This is protecting corporate interests. All recordings are made in public places and on company property." I shifted my gaze to Ethel. "You know what's most interesting? All of the documents you provided to the board of directors are forgeries. Very high quality, no argument, but forgeries." "Prove it." She looked me in the eye for the first time. "Already proven." Ashton stood up, holding a new folder. "The forensics revealed traces of digital processing. What's more, we found the original documents that were used as the basis for the forgeries." Lorenz stepped forward. "This is all speculation. You don't have—" "We have everything," I interrupted him, "including tapes of your conversations with the tax commissioners. Very interesting conversations, I must say." A surprised buzz swept through the room. Some of the board members began to glance around. "Gentlemen," I looked around at the crowd, "this company isn't just a business. It's 3,000 jobs. It's families who depend on the stable operation of the plant. It's partners, customers, suppliers, the whole ecosystem we've been building for 20 years. I put my hands on the back of my chair. And someone is trying to destroy it all. Not for the sake of production development, not to improve operations. For revenge, the personal revenge of a man who 15 years ago tried to steal what we created together." Ethel stood up. "Are you talking about stealing? What do you call what you did 15 years ago? When you kicked your partner out of the business he helped create?" "I was protecting the company from a man who wanted to use it for his own machinations." "You never knew how to share, Forrest." Lorenz stepped forward. "Always wanted to control everything. Always thought you were the only one who knew what was right. And you never understood the main point." I shook my head. "Business isn't just about money and power. It's responsibility to the people who put their trust in you, for the cause you serve." I pulled the last document from the folder. This is an independent audit report, a complete audit of all the company's operations over the last 5 years. Every transaction, every decision, everything is transparent and legal. The chairman took the document, began to read. A whisper ran through the hall again. "And now," I looked at Ethel, "I suggest we talk about exactly how the company documents ended up in the hands of competitors, and what part my personal lawyer." She didn't flinch, but I noticed how tightly her hands were clutching the folder. "You didn't think all these years I'd just forget, did you?" Lorenz took a step toward me. "Didn't think I could forgive the betrayal?" "Betrayal?" I grinned. Funny to hear that from a man who used love as a weapon, who sent a woman to ruin someone else's life for revenge. "I made that decision on my own." Ethel's voice sounded firm. "Because you deserved it, Forrest. Deserve to know what it's like when everything you believe in turns out to be a lie." I looked at her. Beautiful, confident, foreign. "I did love you, and part of me still loves you. That woman who, as it turns out, never existed." A heavy silence hung in the hall. Somewhere in the distance, factory machines hummed, a familiar sound that had become part of my life. The sound of a real cause, one that I had defended and would continue to defend no matter what. "Gentlemen," the chairman coughed, "I think we should call a recess. The situation calls for—" "No," I shook my head. "Let's settle this now. Let's vote on all the items on the agenda. Each of you has credentials, both real and fake. Everyone has the opportunity to make a choice." I sat back in my chair, looking at the portrait of my father on the wall, the man who had taught me the most important thing. Real business is not built on revenge, but on creation. Let the voting begin. The chairman raised his hand. All those in favor of removing the current leadership? I looked out the window, at my plant, and thought about how some battles are worth any loss. Canlis looked the same as always, luxurious, elegant, with impeccable service. Same table by the window, same waiters, same Cabernet. Only everything was different. We were celebrating a victory. The board of directors had dismissed all charges. The tax commission had obtained evidence of falsified documents. Customers and partners had confirmed their loyalty to the company. Lorenz and Ethel left the building immediately after the vote, silently, without looking back. "Here's to victory!" Miles raised his glass. His military bearing had softened a little after the third toast. Ashton, unaccustomedly relaxed without a tie, smiled. "You know, boss, I was really scared at one point. They planned it all so well, but they didn't take into account the main thing." Olivia sat to my right, where Ethel usually sat. "They didn't take into account that you can't beat a team that believes in their cause." I stared at my wine glass, seeing a reflection of the past in the dark red depths. Here, at this table, Ethel had told me so many times that she loved me. Here we had made plans for the future. Here I first noticed the falseness in her smile. "Mr. Thornton," Olivia's voice was soft, understanding. "You've barely touched your food." "I don't feel like it." I tried to smile, but it was unconvincing. "You know," she moved closer, "you have a company that has endured, people willing to follow you, a business you've dedicated your life to. And a team," Miles added, "that will never betray." "A family," Ashton corrected quietly. "We've been a family for a long time." I looked at them, tired, but happy. They weren't fighting for a paycheck or a career. They were defending something bigger, our shared dream, our cause. "Thank you." I felt the heaviness in my chest release for the first time all day. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You would have." Olivia touched my arm gently. "But it was easier with us." "Here's to us." I raised my glass. "Here's to staying true to ourselves and our cause even in the darkest of times."